Good morning and welcome to the Morning Scoop for Sunday, March 20th. This is your daily Buckeye fix. I'm Tom Orr. The spring game is in 27 days, the Notre Dame game in 167 days, the game against Michigan in 251 days. The second round of the NCAA men's basketball tournament will wrap up later today as we finalize the Sweet 16. But today we're going to be talking about a different 64-team bracket. This week, ESPN put together a bracket for a theoretical 64-team field for a much expanded 2022 college football playoff. It is obviously never going to happen, but it's kind of an interesting thought exercise as we wait to see if they're going to expand the playoff beyond 4 teams in just a few years. My guest today is Tony Gerdeman, always one of my favorite people to talk not only college football, but also complete nonsense with. So Tony, thank you for being here for this very silly thought exercise.
Tom, I was the first thought on your mind when it came to a show about an absurd idea with talking about absurd possibilities. Why not give me a call and see if I could do the show? And as it would have, I had nothing else to do, and so I am here.
No one is more available to talk about nonsense than you. I appreciate it. So before we get into the field for this hypothetical 64-team playoff, I think we need to discuss the obvious problem with it. If someone is sitting at home and going, wow, why wouldn't you do this? Why wouldn't you have a 64-team college football playoff? The big issue is that it requires a team to play 6 games to win the championship, which in basketball, that's okay. You can spread that out over 3 weekends and it's no problem. In football, that's 6 weeks, and it's 6 weeks of getting beaten on every single week. So you probably need to cut the regular season down to 9 games in order to keep everyone at or below 15 games in a season for health reasons, which is a big factor in a lot of these conversations right now in terms of expanding the playoff for, even to 10 or 12. This is obviously several steps beyond anything being proposed right now, but I do think it is useful for highlighting some of the issues that they may face while trying to expand the playoff to, whether it's 8 or 12. You're kind of having some of those same issues sort of laid bare a little bit more clearly when we're talking about 64 here.
Yeah, I remember talking to the players at the Big Ten Media Days back in July when the 12-team playoff was happening. And you are going to then have teams that would play, if they make it to the finals, possibly 16 games. And it was obviously a huge concern. But what the players told me is, well, we want to go to the NFL anyway, so why not start playing 16 games now, basically? And so they were, for the most part, for it. There were a couple players who were saying, well, we would need to, this is also in the era of the new NIL stuff, saying I need to get paid more. And I still have this theory that the reason you've got the NIL stuff and you've got the college football now talking about exposures, numbers of exposures and players being hit is so that there is a justification for expanding the playoffs, and they're trying to make things easier in the regular season a little bit so that they can have this expanded postseason, because you will be asking teams to play more games, 3-4 games, something like that. And then the thought of 6 games for the playoffs, where you're essentially almost as long as the regular season at that point, just, 9 games to 6 games or whatever. College football is great because of the regular season. This would, Tom, I know it's not your idea, but it would kill the regular season.
It would kill the regular season. And, another reason that, you're probably having that conversation about the importance of lessening the importance of the regular season is the NCAA basketball tournament is 68 teams, but there are 358 Division I basketball programs. So that's like triple the number of FBS football schools. So, if you were actually going to do it proportionately to what they have in basketball right now, it's more like 24 teams, which is coincidentally, or perhaps not coincidentally, what they do at the FCS level. And that's also, that's probably more than I would want, 24. But with the top 8 teams getting a bye, more likely than not, you're probably only playing a maximum of 4 additional games under that system. That seems a little bit more manageable, but to me, that's probably still too much.
Yeah, it's a lot. And as players become more in tune with, how should I say, getting what is owed to them, or having a better idea of their value, that sort of thing, where as that comes into play more and more, asking them to do it more and more will sometimes come with some maybe some roadblocks or some brakes being put on, and it is a lot. So you can understand why they would be concerned. It is a lot to ask of them, and it's also just the calendar as a whole. If when the playoffs are almost as long as the regular season, as this would be in this this scenario, it's that doesn't work out, but it is still, it's always fun to think about. And when the EA game would allow for tournaments, like everybody, of course you go to a playoff. Who needs bowls? Everybody goes to the playoffs, and because it's fun. It's that's the way everything else is decided, and so why not college football as well to some degree.
All right, so let's dive into this bracket for this theoretical 64-team field. And again, this is ESPN's bracket, and it's for the upcoming 2022 season. So they more or less used SP Plus, which is the Bill Connolly developed metric, to rank teams. It didn't, I think, stick exactly to it, but it just kind of that was a guidepost for them to sort of put this field together. I'm just going to go through the top 3 seed lines right now, because that's going to be the equivalent of a 12-team playoff. Alabama, Ohio State, Michigan, and Georgia are the 1 seeds. 2 seeds were Clemson, Texas A&M, Notre Dame, and Utah. 3 seeds are Oklahoma, Wisconsin, Cincinnati, and NC State. Now that would be your field if this was just a 12-team playoff. I mean, there are teams in there that you can look and go, that team is not winning a national championship. But that doesn't sound too bad. I think I might feel a little bit better about a 12-team playoff now than I did before it was kind of like laid out there like that. Like I would watch those games.
Yeah, give me Texas A&M and Wisconsin, and whether that's in Texas or Wisconsin or a neutral site corporate NFL bowl game type of affair. At this point, it is what it is. But yeah, like, I'm all for that. I'm okay with the 12 team. I think way back when we were both 8-team proponents, like that was the better option. But then they explained why the 12 team, why they liked it. It's like, okay, I can see that, provided there are some campus inclusions, which I still think it's probably going to be on the way out, and for whatever reason they won't allow it. But yeah, I look at this, and I don't know that I need to see Clemson, NC State in the first round. Mm-hmm. But we can jockey some of these positions. But yeah, there's nothing that's talking me out of it just from looking at this and the possibilities, because I'm already over it. Like I'm over the line. I'm ready for it. Let's do it.
The College Football Nerds Twitter account, that's a fantastic college football podcast. They really only do stuff during the season, but they are always a good listen, and they have some interesting thoughts on stuff. And they explain sort of some of the stuff about why you're not necessarily going to have as many, in this kind of tournament, you're not going to have that many 14-3 kind of upsets in college football as you do in college basketball, because, you don't have this one kind of scoring is worth 1.5 times the other kind of scoring. So if you're good at this one kind of scoring, you can create some big problems for other teams. But there were a couple on this one that I looked at and I went, ooh, that might be a little dicey. One of them was 16-seeded Army playing first-seeded Michigan. Tony, we just saw Michigan and Army play a couple of years ago, and it was like, boy, I bet Michigan would rather be a 2-seed and get some generic CUSA team rather than have to deal with Army, that triple option, and that. I don't think any 1 seed wants to see Army and that offense in the first round at any cost.
No, it does you no good. And I'm sure, you see that draw, and if they have the camera on, say, Michigan as they're watching the draw, usually they have the camera on the team for the reaction when they get to see their name. Like, to see Michigan watching themselves get the draw of Army, I don't think you're going to see like this, everybody jumping up and down and whooping up. They would probably look, and then they would look down to their knees, and defensive linemen start rubbing their knees like, oh no, this is going to be bad. And the strength coach would be looking at him like, all right, you got to start stretching, because you're going to need it. You're going to need to be tough up there in the middle. So yeah, that's a bad one. That's one of those things where you'll have the talking heads, like as soon as they see the draw, like, Army 16 seed, and then you'll have the smarts who are like, ooh, I'm going with a 16-1 here. I'm taking the 16 over the 1. That way when it happens, I can say, I told you so. And if it doesn't, it's like, well, what did you expect? It was a 16 versus a 1. Cut me some slack.
So, that I think is one of the fun sides of this kind of a conversation. One of the things that's a little less fun, and we talked a little bit earlier about how, you're shaving the regular season down and you're kind of negating the importance of the regular season. Here's a great example of how you're really negating the importance of regular season. In a 64-team tournament in this ESPN bracket, 10 Big Ten teams made it, including Maryland. Maryland snuck in as a 12 seed. The only Big Ten teams who didn't make the field were Rutgers, Indiana, Illinois, and Northwestern. So yes, even in a 64-team field, the state of Illinois not represented. Good job, everyone. If I counted right, I think a total of 13 of the 14 SEC teams made the field. Everybody except for Vanderbilt from the SEC made the field. So, that kind of underscores the other big issue with this size of a field. Like, it sounds awesome, but then the regular season is, like, meaningless. Like, you basically, as an SEC team, you're just trying to stay healthy because you're in. You basically have an auto bid being an SEC team other than Vanderbilt. So that makes the regular season basically meaningless for any major conference team.
Well, and with that in mind, how many games does Alabama play Bryce Young? Do they limit him a couple of games to keep him healthy because you're going to have this long stretch? And so then those Alabama season ticket holders who have now maybe 5 home games only get to see their stars in 3 of them, something like that. And you mentioned Maryland being a 12 seed. Like, when you think about the March Madness, the basketball tournament, you get there's an affinity for the 12 seed because you've seen it, go and advance, and you can see them going into the Sweet 16 and the Elite 8. You look at the college football version of the 12 seeds, and it's like, no, not Maryland. No, maybe like Kansas State, which is also a 12 seed.
Mm-hmm.
But there's no affinity. Like, yeah, I could see them maybe advancing, but I won't like it. It's not going to be fun to watch. There's no, I'm learning new stuff about this team. It's like, no, we know what Kansas State is. I don't need to see it anymore.
As someone who follows the Kansas State football Twitter account, bite your tongue, mister. That is one of my favorite, like, just, I don't know if guilty pleasure, but just like, I am genuinely fascinated by Kansas State football because they do more with less than just about anyone else in the country. So, the other fun thought exercise with this whole thing is going back and thinking about teams that would have been like really fun Cinderellas in previous seasons that, either fringe top 25 teams who would have, really given some good teams fits, or even teams that might have ended up in like the 40s, which would be the equivalent of like a 10 seed, who might have been able to make a pretty good run. And as someone with a Navy, Navy midshipman in his family, there were a few Navy teams that had senior quarterbacks. Keenan Reynolds in 2015, Malcolm Perry in 2019. Both of those teams won 11 games, finished in line with what would have been like a 5 seed or so, and would have been an absolute nightmare to prep for with a week of short notice. There are also some really fun Boise State and Gonzaga parallels you probably would have seen play out over some of the years. But, is there anyone that jumps out to you as a team that would have been like, oh man, an absolute nightmare to see on the other side of the bracket from you?
Well, and I was just keeping this to Ohio State when I was thinking about it. And the team that came to my mind would have been the 2005 Buckeyes, who were just hitting their stride. And I don't know if they would have been a 2 or a 3 seed, but that's one of those teams that I could have seen winning it all in terms of the tournament matchup. And, some of the Northwestern spread teams, like even like the Damian Anderson stuff, where 2000 or so, where that year they beat Michigan, like some of those where you just they have a little bit of luck to them, and they're already Cinderella in that way. I wouldn't put the 95 or 96 Northwestern teams there, since we saw what happened once they got to the postseason and with their bowl games. But yeah, but it was as far as the Ohio State thing, I immediately thought of like the 2005 team, and granted that team only lost 2 games that year. But I think as they got to November, December, I don't know that teams would have wanted to see them with what they had going in a fully operational Troy Smith at that point.
Yeah, and you for every one of those, there's probably does a 2002 team squeak through six
Oh God.
one-score games? Probably not. They probably, the 2002 team probably benefited from not having that. 2005 probably missed out. Does 2006? Do they, if you have a couple easy ones, ramping up to, to the Florida game, does that help?
I think 2006 would be helped by the fact that it's not just a one-off. Like you
right.
still have a path. You still have to stay focused. You haven't won anything yet. Whereas after that Michigan game, they believed they were the best and that they had won it. And then all that's left is we just have to go prove ourselves against Florida. And it's like, well, no, if there's a tournament, if there are like 3 other games, I think they would have been much more locked in and had a much better chance of winning, which is strange to say.
Yeah, and they don't have a 50-day layoff like they did during that season. I mean, that was a killer. And, how much would you pay to watch a 64-team playoff for the 2007 season when you had USF and Boston College as number 2 teams in the country, and like Rutgers is killing people's dreams, and
Kansas and
Missouri, West Virginia. I would love to see a 64-team playoff for that year. And, the other team that jumped to mind to me, do you remember, I think it was either the first or second Brett Bielema team, 2014 in Arkansas. They had a 7-point loss to Mississippi State, who finished 11th, just annihilated LSU and Ole Miss by a combined 47-0, lost by 7 to number 14 Mizzou, and then played Texas in the Texas Bowl and just crushed them 31-7. Like, that team, like, of all the teams thinking back, like, that's one of those where it's like, I think they finished 6 and maybe 7-6 that year. So, like, they're coming out of the SEC, they're like, what, an 8 seed, 9 seed, something like that. Like, that's the kind of team that, like, you look at that. If you're a 1 seed and you've got like number 9 Arkansas in the second round, you're like, oh, no, do not want, no.
No, and was Alex Collins was one of the running backs there, and they were able to run the ball and control things. Yeah, but really, that's also where it would be interesting to see the lower levels of the SEC, how they would do against everybody else, and would they then show their power and their greatness when you've got the ninth team in the SEC making it to the Elite 8 or something like that, because now they no longer have to play the SEC. Now they can just play against the Mountain West and the ACC and the Big Ten and really show that they are everything that, and granted, everybody believes and knows that this is the best conference, but they would be able to show or try to show just how much better they are than everybody else, or would it expose them for not being as good as they think they are?
Maybe, perhaps, Tony, much like John Calipari in Kentucky just a few days ago, they just couldn't get up for non-SEC play. So, I mean, they just didn't want to be there. So, I mean, that can happen, and obviously no reason to ask any follow-up questions at all. So, Tony, that means we're out of questions. So that means we're out of time. So, Tony, thank you as always for joining me. Hope you guys enjoyed that show. I thought that the idea was kind of interesting. It's a really interesting thought exercise, and I think it, obviously it's never going to happen, but it does kind of, draw into starker relief probably some of the issues that you're facing with some kind of a smaller expanded college football playoff. So it seemed like kind of an interesting conversation to have just from that perspective. So hope you guys enjoyed that. We'll be back with another episode, of course, tomorrow. Tony and I will probably have a new episode of, we have dropped a couple episodes of the Buckeye Weekly podcast recently. We'll have another one coming up early in the week this week to keep you updated as Ohio State gets back to spring football practice early this week. There will be plenty to talk about there, and there's been plenty to talk about on all our other great podcasts, including the Big Meat Kickoff with Kevin Noon, Around the Oval with Alex Gleitman, and Gives in the Bank with Mark Givler and Bill the Bank Green. You can find them all wherever you find this. Just search Buckeye Scoop to find all of those. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.